What is intimacy? We've got a lot of ideas about what intimacy is. You and I probably have lots of challenges about intimacy. So we're going to dive into the intimacy with the 59th hexagram. Welcome to Wake Up Epic. I'm Alex Iglesia. We want to look at the shadow of dishonesty, the gift of intimacy, the higher possibility of transparency. Now, the embodied story of the 59th hexagram starts in gateway. So gateway is taking a small step back from the world, becoming an active agent in your life, and then widening your perspective. So in UZAZU, gateway is a space of self-esteem. We're taking a moment to feel ourselves as an active agent with perspective, taking a perspective on who we are active in the world. What's your story about yourself? What do you think about yourself? A little bit more than how do you feel about yourself? So get a sense for, generally speaking, what's your story of yourself today? I am someone who can. Then we shift into the bottom of the hexagram and we come narrow into pillar. So we're staying back, we're staying up, and we're shifting one dimension to narrow. And pillar is away from the world, up and active, but focused, narrow. So now we're in the situation, we're in ourself. If gateway is what's our story of self, pillar is what's it like to be myself, with a little bit less story. So when coaches, therapists ask us to, or self-help folks ask us to get beyond our story, stop telling your story, just show up, just be you. Well, whatever the heck that is, if we could even go beyond words, would be something like this. I'm doing this, I am this, and letting the words be a lot less important. So then the 59th hexagram tells a story of, in a world of self-esteem, in a world of this is who I think I am, the story of myself, here's me actually showing up. Here's what's really wanting to happen through and as this thing called me. And then that brings us back into a story. That informs a new sense of self, perhaps for the world, a new story for the world. So imagine this happening again and again and again all day long, every day, as a capacity that you have. Taking your story, taking the world story of you into your actual action, your actual motivation, your actual showing up. And then that informing how you see yourself and how others get to see you. So then what the heck is dishonesty? Let's shake that out a minute. So what might dishonesty be? Something's off with our story of self as it relates to what's actually happening with us, through us, as us. So to make that very obvious, here's an empty cup, an empty mug. So my story is it's an empty mug, but at the moment I look at it, well, there's a couple drops in there. So there's a way in which I'm being dishonest. If I look at reality, what's actually showing up with the story that I had, but once I looked at that reality, now I can tell you, this is a mug that has a couple drops in it. And I could continue telling the story. And every bit of that story could be fact-checked in some degree. So where might you be or have been, where have you been dishonest, a glitch between the story you tell about yourself and what is actually going on. And we might make the story too big and then not want to be in it. Like, how many times have we had a goal? Yes, I'm going to do this. Yes, this is my dream, but maybe it was somebody else's dream, or maybe it was society's expectation. And then we try to fit in it and something feels wrong. Like, this suit feels too baggy. This shirt is too tight. So that might be one way dishonesty shows up. What might be another way? Well, what if we won't come up and active in our pillar? So imagine coming back, trying to choose to allow yourself to show up, to allow a creative impulse to come through you, to be inspired and to come into action. And it just won't. It's like, I can't get up with this. And instead, we collapse in some way. Then what's our story? Well, that story would be about the me that can't show up. And then the story is going to keep containing me as someone who can't show up, or can't do, or can't make room for this idea, this dream to come through. And then we're locked in to a story that is not our truest self story. So then what is intimacy? Well, how can we let the story we have about ourselves be felt and seen and come through, and allow what is beyond our story to be seen, felt, come through, and then be crafted into a new narrative, new imagery, new language, and let this be permeable. So imagine that there's no need to protect you being in a box, you being in a story, and you dissolving that story and you telling a new story. Intimacy with self, or intimacy, somehow has to do with the story and then just showing up. The story and showing up. So, I mean, that immediately brings to mind relationship challenges. What story do we have about somebody? And how does that affect how we show up? What story do we have about somebody that affects how they show up? And if I have a story, if I've got an idea about who my wife is, I'm putting her in a box she might not want to be in. So can I update my story about her and keep recognizing how I show up with her, how she shows up with me, and tell the truest story? And then finally, what is transparency? If we just do the movement of gateway and pillar, can you give yourself the experience of allowing life to move through you in a way that is seen and known? So a simple statement might be, I allow life to move through me and be seen and known as it is. And I'll drop in one more idea here from human design. From a human design perspective, the 59th hexagram is the gate of sexuality, seduction, and the gateway to sacred sexual power. It's the energy and drive to sexually reproduce. It can be the energy of coming together in an intimate way in a non-sexual relationship. So we take sex away from just the pure physical act and consider the merging of multiple energies, multiple possibilities, the smashing together of creative ideas for innovation, always giving birth to something new in the world. And that gives us another angle to play with, to embody this archetype of the playmate. So what we'll do, having landed all these ideas with our bodies in the flow of the movements, is move through 4 activation statements. Each of these statements come out of the pure movements, and we're going to drop them into our movements and see where they're true for us, where they're not true for us, where we may go weak, and how and where we remain strong. So we'll drop these in. We'll have about 80 seconds or so for each one, and then we'll move to the next one. Here we go. I invite you to invite all this in, starting with gateway. At your own pace, move from gateway to pillar and pillar to gateway. The first activation is, I can feel confident and capable making good choices and decisions. I can feel confident and capable making good choices and decisions. Get the feeling of making a good decision. Know that you are someone who is capable of it. The second activation, I can be thoughtful and conscientious about the actions I take. I can be thoughtful and conscientious of the actions I take. Consider not being willing to be thoughtful and conscientious of the actions you take and the dishonesty required to not notice what that story is. I can be thoughtful and conscientious about the actions I take. Third activation, I can trust my ability to adapt and improve my plans and actions. I can trust my ability to adapt and improve my plans and actions. I am someone who can trust my ability to adapt and improve my plans and actions. Fourth activation, I can align my actions with what I believe to be most good and true. I can align my actions with what I believe to be good and true. For the final round, hold both of these energies together. So one arm in pillar, one arm in gateway. Let yourself feel the creative tension and potential of both at the same time. And bring your attention to a goal, a dream, a desire, an issue. What's most true and good about that? Can you allow and align your actions with that? Take the next few breaths to complete this practice and step out into neutral. In neutral, we're letting go of the practice. We're letting go of the energy. We're letting go of the archetype, and we're getting to just be here. So look around the room and let it sink in that you've done a ton of change work for yourself right now. Let go of any need to figure out what that means. And notice just what's alive and true for you right now. And this is the part where we'll come together in the video. And if you're doing this alone later on your own, great time to journal, to draw out from you what's true, what have you noticed, tell the story of your experience to yourself, or in this case, to each other. What are the gems? What's the takeaway? What are you getting as a result of this hero's journey today to bring back to the world? Alexandra, how was that for you?
Well, it's definitely a very, very, very rich inquiry. And what struck me most in this is how intimacy does imply relational aspect. If there was no other, where it was just self, I don't think we often consider intimacy with oneself to be a thing, but it probably does exist now that I've spoken it out loud, that perhaps, yeah, intimacy does begin with intimacy with oneself. As how could one possibly be intimate with others if they're not intimate with themselves? So that's a cool inquiry. But the thing that was fascinating me during the exercise is how it is possible to be out there interacting, relating, and yet not truly allowing anyone or anything in. how those two things are not necessarily correlated. One can be out and about and sociable and not really allow others in, or not be out and about at all and yet very capable of intimacy with at least one person, even though they're not out there saying much and yet having the capacity for intimacy. So that's what I was contemplating, is how the actions, the outer actions, do not necessarily imply that true intimacy is happening, that this allowing something in, truly taking something in, is a whole other skill. And I guess it's something that does not necessarily come from mental understanding. And yet, I guess one could resolve to deepen their skills of allowing and connecting. And yet, it happens on this deeper, more mysterious level. And somehow that came alive for me in this exercise.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I was really struck with the last activation statement, the aligning of actions with what I believe to be good and true. Can I be honest about what I believe is good and true? So we know about limiting beliefs. We know about like, oh, you're living a lie. You're not in integrity. Well, what is it that I'm willing to say, like, I believe this is good and true about money, about sex, about genocide, about water? Am I willing to align my actions with that? There's something about that, making that mechanical, dropping that down to like, what is good and true? What do you believe is good and true? Are you aligning your actions with that? And from an intimacy perspective, like that sounds like integrity by itself. From an intimacy perspective, though, when I think about it relationally, because you brought in like, yeah, because relationally, but if you and I are having a conversation, if I'm presenting an offer to the world and I'm not being honest about what I think is good and true about something, and then I'm aligning my story with you about it, like I could think this is really good and true, but not tell you. I could think play and joy is wonderful, but because of my trauma and my issues, I can't admit it to you. So how could you feel like you trust me and we are being intimate with each other? You know, we're gonna have the experience of, oh, we just can't go there. I can't have that experience of honesty, intimacy, transparency with this person when we talk about that. So there's a radical integrity for me in this. And in the story that I tell and being willing to be in that story. And I can see that they're so separate. Oh, and I work with a lot of my coaching clients have this thing of like, this is the big story I have. And it's very disconnected from their actions for months, for years. And that's not even necessarily wrong. For me, the story I've told is how for 9 years, we were like, Hawaii, Hawaii, Hawaii. It was always in our field. It was always in our awareness. But we didn't really know why and what to do about it. And maybe in those 9 years, some sense of, okay, let's pause a second. What would be good and true about moving to Hawaii? Or what's good and true about even knowing that Hawaii exists? Can we align our actions with that? Like we never had that kind of a conversation, which is a little more specific than why should we go and how are we going to afford it and all the more superficial fears and ideas that don't really mean anything and aren't really real conversations. So there's a lot in this. I'm just going to put this up because my attention gets drawn to this from Trader Joe's. I'm there when you're sad. I'm there when you're sick. So we'll leave it there. Thanks everybody for waking up transparency and intimacy and even awareness of dishonesty. So the thing to do is take this practice, just a pure physical practice, with the words as almost like seeds, as starters for the practice, but dive into the movement and the flow, because every time you do, you will have break-ins, breakouts, breakthroughs, and so much more to share that's true for you. So thanks for waking up, Epic, and I'll see you in the next experience.